Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's top 10 episodes of Firefly. This video is where I count down my top 10 favorite episodes of Firefly. This video will contain spoilers, so if you haven't seen Firefly, you will not want to watch this video. So I've been planning on making this video for months now, but it just so happens that I'm making this video just after receiving the very sad news that the actor Ron Glass, known for multiple roles but also who portrayed Shepard Book on Firefly, passed away. So it seems fitting now that I take a look at my favorite episodes of the beloved show that he acted on. So I was going back and forth on whether or not to include the feature film Serenity on this list, since it is part of the same story and in fact concludes the story overall and has the same characters and everything. But in the end I decided not to, as it's technically not a part of the TV series Firefly, and a feature film format is different than a TV episode, so it would be a bit unfair to compare them. But just to let you know how it would have gone, Serenity would have been my number one, which again seems a bit unfair as it has the advantage of a big budget film, so I decided to exclude it entirely. So I usually start my top 10 videos by naming my 5 least favorite episodes. However, since there were only 14 episodes of Firefly altogether, that does change the dynamic a bit. But I will, however, still start out by naming my bottom 4 least favorite and then move on to my top 10. Just know that there isn't that huge of a difference between my number 4 least favorite and my number 10 favorite. I'll just stick to this format just because it's what I'm used to. But it is fair to say that these bottom 4 are my least favorite episodes of the series. Had there been less than 4 episodes that I didn't really care for, I would have just counted some extra episodes as honorable mentions that didn't make my top 10. But these 4 episodes do happen to be episodes I didn't care for very much. So, getting to my bottom 4 least favorite episodes, let's start with my number 4, The Message, where Captain Reynolds is contacted by an old friend who died. Not necessarily a horrible episode, however, I don't think it worked very well as the ending got a bit contrived and ridiculous. Number 3 on my list is Trash. I was not a fan of the Saffron character, and this episode just felt like a huge excuse just to bring her back in a silly plot about a heist which I really could not get into. Number 2 is Shindig. Another thing in the show I wasn't a fan of was the will they won't they relationship with Anara and Mal, as it was so cliched and uninspired, and this episode was dull for exploring that and a bit ridiculous with the duel at a fancy party. Yawn. And my number 1 least favorite episode of Firefly is Our Mrs. Reynolds. So I mentioned before that I didn't like Saffron, and this episode in particular was ridiculous, where Captain Reynolds wakes up after getting drunk to find he's married. At first I was enjoying this episode, but I thought to myself it better not be revealed that his wife is a villain that's just playing them, because that would be so predictable and so cliched. And yes, that's exactly what happened. It was just as boring and dumb as I thought it would be, making this my least favorite episode of Firefly. So enough of the negativity, let me get into my top 10 favorite episodes of Firefly, starting with my number 10, Safe. This was a decent enough episode where the mystery around Shepard Book is explored, where his name seems to carry a lot of weight with the Alliance, and also has an interesting subplot with River and Simon being kidnapped by villagers that eventually accuse River of being a witch. Was a rather interesting subplot. Number 9 on my list is War Stories, where it is great to see them explore Wash's relationship with his wife and how it seems natural that there'd be a bit of jealousy with her close relationship with Mal, and this was handled nicely with a lot of humorous touches, but also an intense episode where the two of them are tortured, and we get follow-up with Niska seeking his revenge for the botched train job. Number 8 is Objects in Space, a pretty intense episode where an expert bounty hunter sneaks on the ship and attempts to capture River, and the way the crew managed to get out of this hairy situation was quite impressive and fascinating to watch. Number 7 on my list is Bushwhacked, a quite creepy and eerie episode that explores the concept of the Reavers quite nicely as they salvage a doomed ship that was attacked by Reavers, making this an effective, creepy episode. Next is my number 6, which is Heart of Gold, the especially Western-esque episode where Inara gives the crew a mission to protect what is essentially a whorehouse from the leader of the colony, who is a very shady fellow that wishes to do them harm. This episode played out nicely by exploring Mel's relationship with a special woman, and on top of the suspenseful story of Serenity crew sticking up for the weak against a superior enemy. Number 5 is Serenity, not the film, but the pilot episode of the series of the same name, where we're first introduced to our main characters. This episode starts to show off nicely by giving us a scene with Mel and Zoe in the war, and then flashes forward to present times where they lead a ragtag group of outlaws who take on some passengers, including an unusual shepherd and a rich doctor carrying a secret. On to number 4, which is Jaynestown, a fun and funny episode where the crew go to a planet where Jane is worshipped as a hero, and I must admit to laughing my ass off when they started singing that song about Jane being a hero, and it was quite a catchy song too. And the way they connected that Jane was mistaken for a Robin Hood type figure when he was really just trying to escape with his life was dealt really nicely, and how he dealt with the false hero worship was handled great as well. Definitely a quality episode. Next is my number 3, Out of Gas, which is an episode structured nicely as it starts with Mel being injured and alone on the ship, and then goes to flashbacks to tell how he got there, and at the same time we get flashbacks to how some of the crew first met and became the crew, and the structure worked perfectly to create suspense, and the way it played out was masterfully done. Number 2 on my list is The Train Job. This is the episode I think exemplifies the Western style concept of the show being about a group of criminals pulling heists perfectly, as it illustrates the type of thugs they are, as once Mel realizes the goods they stole are much needed medical supplies for poor colonists, he goes out of his way to return the goods, and at great risk to himself. And the way they handled the ruffians that hired them was awesome. Again, the scene where Reynolds talks to the lead henchman and tells him he will return his boss's money and go their separate ways, but the henchman promises to hunt them down and kill them, so Mel simply kills the henchman and then says the exact same thing to the next henchman, who's just like, yes, I agree. And it just perfectly illustrates the type of thug that Mel is, and overall it was just an awesome episode. And my number 1 favorite episode of Firefly is Ariel. The episode where the crew drops Inara off at a core planet for a medical exam, but River freaks out and slashes Jane on the way, so Simon comes up with a heist plan on a hospital where the crew would make off with a lot of valuable medical supplies, while Simon gets access to high-tech medical equipment to try to figure out what's wrong with River. But things go wrong when Jane betrays them and calls the feds on River and Simon. Now, my favorite aspect of the show was the River and Simon fugitive storyline, as it added a nice sense of mystery and foreboding to the show overall, and this episode used this storyline the best, as the creepy agents that killed everyone just for talking to Simon really raised attention, and this was by far the most suspenseful episode of the show, as they were up against nearly impossible odds. And on top of that, the ending where Mel nearly killed Jane after he found out he tried to turn Simon the River in was amazing, and again it illustrates exactly the type of man Mel is. And in addition, it illustrates the type of show this is by having one of the crew turn on some other crew members and the captain nearly kill him over it. This certainly breaks conventions, and overall I think this episode just worked amazingly, and everything just comes together, making this my #1 favorite episode of Firefly. So that's it for my top 10 episodes of Firefly. Be sure to keep an eye on my channel, as next week I'll be doing my full-length review of Firefly and Serenity, so be sure to check that out, as well as I do many more videos on shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, Humans, The Walking Dead, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.